Is Israel on the verge of a nightmare scenario of an all-out war on all fronts at once? Will Israel need to defend itself from thousands of ballistic missiles at the same time from every direction? It seems that the Revolutionary Guards in Iran and the proxies, especially Hezbollah and the Houthis in Yemen, are preparing for a direct war against Israel and against the United States. As I'm recording this video, everything could change in just a moment. Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host Yair Pinto, bringing you the truth about what's happening in Israel. And today, also the whole truth about what's happening in the wider Middle East. An American strike appears to be imminent, and Iran has closed its airspace. An American aircraft carrier is making its way to the Red Sea, and in Israel, the alert level is at its peak, as many municipalities announced that they will open the public air raid shelters and are otherwise bracing for incoming missiles. So, what's going on? In the shadow of the conflicting reports about the American strike and its timing, the President of the United States stood before reporters on Wednesday and said he received a quite decisive update that the attacks against the protesters has stopped in Iran, adding that we'll soon find out what that means. Earlier, it was reported that the United States and Britain are evacuating non-essential staff from military bases in the Gulf, while a European official claimed a strike could happen within 24 hours, but in the New York Times it was reported that it will be carried out only in a few days. Meanwhile, more countries are calling on their citizens to leave Iran immediately, and some are also calling on their citizens to leave Israel. For instance, after the conflicting reports about a possible timing for an American strike in Iran, the aviation giant Lufthansa announced that its night flights to Israel were cancelled until Monday. Britain recommended its citizens not to come to Israel, while the British ambassador left Iran. But the situation in Iran is also creating a domino effect for many other countries ruled by dictators and other regimes, including Turkey, which is concerned about the protests and emphasized the importance of maintaining stability and avoiding a deterioration into a regional disorder. The wave of protests in Iran is also shaking the Houthi leadership in Sana'a in Yemen, and the security alert was risen up into its peak, and oversight was also increased, and the leadership went underground against the background of fear of a collapse in the Iranian support and an outbreak of internal protests. In Israel's northern neighbor, Hezbollah is threatening Lebanon's government with a civil war, defiantly declaring that they will not disarm and claiming that the ceasefire agreement with Israel applies only south of the Litani River, only on the border with Israel. And in a related story, they accused the foreign minister of being the enemy's spokesperson because he dared to publicly admit the truth that Israel has the right to strike as long as Hezbollah does not disarm. And meanwhile, in the Gaza Strip, the IDF is preparing in case there is a need for a renewed military campaign, while President Trump announced that we're going into Phase B in his ceasefire plan for the Gaza Strip, including the activation of the International Peace Council. This announcement has come even though the remains of fallen hostage Ran Gaveli have not yet been returned to Israel, but the United States is not waiting and will soon introduce the Palestinian Committee for Daily Management of the Gaza Strip, which will be responsible for rehabilitation, sanitation, and other infrastructure that include also education of the Palestinian people. Despite Prime Minister Netanyahu's declarations against the Palestinian Authority, at the head of the committee will stand Ali Shatach from Ramallah. However, the International Stabilization Force that is supposed to oversee everything will not be announced at this time. And in a related story, ahead of the meeting in Cairo on establishing the Technocratic Committee in Gaza, Israel marked disqualified candidates due to ties with the Hamas terrorist organization and approved names with a past in the Palestinian Authority. In Jerusalem, they feel that Hamas will try to integrate into the middle ranks and preserve its power. However, the terror organization says it is ready to hand over the civil government in Gaza to the Technocratic Committee, although Israeli officials fear that the officials who will actually manage the Gaza Strip will be people who support Hamas or cooperate with it. So why is the situation so complicated, and why has Israel agreed to this step despite all the reservations? We'll take a closer look. In another set of negotiations Israel is conducting with its neighbors, and despite contacts that are mediated by the Americans and the agreement on the technical coordination mechanisms, Israel has made it clear that Syria's demand for withdrawal from Mount Hermon blocks any security agreement and warned of a return of Russian military presence in southern Syria. So we have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report of what's happening in Israel just before we go into the weekend, and we bring you the whole truth about what's happening in this war on day 831 of this war with Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region that are taking their orders from Iran's Revolutionary Guards, which are the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. And a moment before we continue, I want to ask you to help us share these videos. Make sure to hit the subscribe button so that you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. And speaking of what's happening in the Middle East right now, as I'm speaking, the skies over Iran are almost empty. The country closed its airspace overnight for several hours, and on flight tracking systems, you can see less and less traffic over this country. This is not just another update. It's a sign of an emergency, because when a country turns off the skies, it means it's preparing for what could come at literally any moment. The question of what could come was answered by President Trump, who spoke on Wednesday about a quick and decisive action, not a long war, repeating his message to the protesters: help is on the way. He also said that he received a quiet, decisive update that the massacres of the protesters has stopped and that there will be no more executions, but he also said, we'll check. We'll see what that means for real. In other words, he's also keeping all options on the table open. And even now, everything can change. On the ground in Iran, the picture is very blurry. Not because there's nothing to report, but because it's hard to know. The country is under a prolonged communication blackout, and the reports from the last 24 hours are contradictory and partial. And that is exactly what allows the regime to operate far from the public's eye, and the world does not know what's happening. So what do we do know? The numbers of fatalities and arrests are already at levels that shake the system. There are different estimates, from as many as 20,000 fatalities to the regime's official numbers of around 2,000. But the number of arrests is definitely in the tens of thousands at this point, and many hospitals report being simply overwhelmed with the number of people asking for treatment for traumatic injuries, including gunshots. And above all of this, there is a clock that is ticking. Sources in Europe speak about a window of up to 24 hours for an American action, while others speak about a few days and the possibility that a first move would actually be a softer strike, including cyber attacks on internal security systems, or a move aimed at breaking the mechanisms of repression, not bringing down buildings. It's important to remember that the Americans have no guarantee that a kinetic strike will bring down the regime. On the contrary, there is concern that actually a regime pushed into a corner during protests will be more dangerous and will respond in a wild way. Now let's go down to the operational level, because the Americans are already moving people and their assets all around the region. There is a cautious evacuation of non-essential staff from bases inside the Gulf, mainly out of concern of an Iranian response. The central base in Qatar, El Ubaida, is once again in the headlines. This is the same base that in the past observed an Iranian missile attack in response to an American action, and the message in Tehran is clear: if the Americans attack them, they will hit United States bases in this region as well as Israel. This is not a theoretical threat. There is an existing target that everyone knows about. However, even before the bombs start falling and the missiles start flying, you can already see signs of a modern war. There are reports of GPS disruptions in parts of Iraq and also Iran. This is not background noise, it's a tool. Such jamming can damage aircraft navigation, mislead systems, disrupt civilian movements, and make it harder to build a situational picture. When this happens, someone is preparing the ground. Speaking of preparations, Israel is on high alert for a scenario of an Iranian response to American action that will try to create an image of strength, including ballistic missile attacks like we faced during the 12-day war last June. This is accompanied by cyber attacks on the home front. And at the same time, at this stage, there is no focused warning about time or method, and therefore, the message to the public remains cautious. The IDF is monitoring, preparing, and asking people not to spread baseless rumors. However, on the civilian level, we all feel the tension as municipalities have already started opening up the public bomb shelters, sending notices to residents, and having a public conversation that understands that tonight could look different from any night that we have seen so far. And furthermore, airlines are changing their plans, reducing flights and rerouting lines to bypass routes so that they don't enter the space that looks like it could suddenly become a war zone. This includes an impact on Israel as well, because at the moment, planes don't fly over Iran and the entire Middle East shrinks. The flying times change and the load shifts to other corridors. Now, we switch our focus to the diplomatic arena, which is no less crowded and tense than the skies. In Tehran, they say that the direct talks with Washington were halted following the threats, but that's no surprise since the regime was only using the talks to try and buy time and never had any intention of coming to a mutual acceptable agreement. Elsewhere, the Turks issued a predictable call to avoid foreign intervention in Iran's internal affairs and warned that such chaos in Iran will spill into the entire region, by which they probably mean that they are worried about their own people protesting against the Turkish regime. So, there are quiet attempts by several other Middle Eastern countries to influence the situation, calm the tensions, or at least understand where the blow will come from. Here, it's important to pay attention. The countries of this region are not asking, will there be a strike? They are asking, what will happen the day after a strike takes place? Iran's proxy terrorist groups are also part of this equation, even if they are trying to keep a low profile for now. In Lebanon, the message that emerges is that Hezbollah is not rushing to get involved unless the Iranian regime sees a truly existential threat. It's one sentence, but it's worth a lot. It says the organization wants to preserve strength, not burn itself with Iran, and not observe a blow from Israel while the Lebanese street is boiling anyway. It also creates room for maneuver for Israel, but only up to a certain point. And inside Iran itself, the regime is trying to present an absurd false picture, with officials telling international media outlets that everything has calmed down. There are no more riots. There are no executions. However, these officials also speak about terror elements that infiltrated the country, about shooting in the streets, and about peak readiness of the Revolutionary Guards. This is a familiar method, turning a civilian protest into a security threat in order to justify live fire, arrests, and intimidation. So here's the situation right now. This is the picture. President Trump is talking about a quick blow, but not setting a date, while Iran is threatening to hit Israel and American bases in response. There have been movements of personnel and assets, and navigation disruptions. The skies are closing and also opening on an almost hourly basis, and inside Iran, the numbers, the images, and the testimonies are still collapsing into a communications fog. So, we are on the verge of an event that could change the entire Middle East in one night. And the equation that leads us to the next arena is simple. If the dictatorship in Tehran cracks, who else in this region will start trembling from the domino effect? There's one thing that we can be sure of, is that here at TBN Israel, we'll keep reporting about everything that's happening in this region so that you will know how to pray for the situation. Now, I want to give you some analysis of what we're seeing, because it is important to understand that what's happening in Iran creates a domino effect, and the next dominoes to fall won't only be Iran's proxies, but all the dictatorial countries in this region might be affected. In the Houthi-occupied Yemeni capital of Sana'a, it feels like a state of emergency. Roadblocks are everywhere, and armed men are stationed on all the main routes, while markets are being closed early. The Houthi leadership has already gone underground, and the security alert is at its peak. All of this is because of one thing: the protests in Iran. The moment Tehran cracks, the proxies start to tremble. And that matters, because if the Iranian backbone weakens, the entire axis of evil loses oxygen, money, and weapon supplies. Any internal shock amongst the Ayatollahs or the regime shifting attention inward can ignite popular unrest for them as well, because there's plenty of things for the people of Yemen to be upset about, including the cost of living, salaries not being paid, arrests and kidnappings, and other stuff like opposition groups. And at the same time, Israel has already proven in the past that it knows how to hit the head of the Houthi system, taking out 13 senior government and military figures in the past 2 years alone, including the Houthi chief of staff and ministers in the government. Next, let's talk about Turkey. Ankara looks at Iran as a giant state of more than 90 million people, and any collapse there is an operational nightmare because of a shared border of about 560 kilometers through the Zagros mountain range. This border is hard to control, and it could become a route for militias, smugglings, and refugees. In addition to its own possible migrants, Iran serves as a dam holding back enormous migration pressure from the east, and a collapse of the regime in Tehran could create a refugee wave from Afghanistan, Pakistan, and even China that Turkey does not want and says that it will not be able to absorb. Economics are involved here as well. Iran has the world's second largest gas reserves, and if sanctions are lifted, it can become a direct competitor over pipelines, trade routes, and regional status. Next is the moderate Arab governments in the Persian Gulf. Despite historical hostility, Sunni states led by Saudi Arabia prefer stability in Iran over chaos, understanding that the fallout from regime change could be worse than the regime itself. In other words, better the devil that you know than the devil that you don't know. And Washington has warned the Gulf states to be prepared for a scenario of an American strike, but behind the scenes there is a regional effort to prevent it. And within all of this, there is another fear circulating in Arab corridors of power: Israel. After what happened in Syria, their fear is that the moment of Iranian weakness, Israel will exploit a window of opportunity and reshape the playing field. But here it must be said clearly, Israel is the only democracy in this region, an ally of the United States of America, a country that provides full equal rights to all its citizens, the strongest economy in the Middle East, and it is also the only power capable of combining force, technology, and deterrence without collapsing from within. The bottom line is, a crack in Tehran does not stay in Tehran. It passes like an electronic current through Sana'a, Ankara, and the Gulf. And the next question is this: if everyone in the region feels this domino effect, what will happen in Gaza when the pressure on Hamas to disarm rises and the United States pushes to advance to phase B of the deal? And it seems that there too, all the countries of the Middle East are involved. So a moment before we continue to the Gaza Strip, I want to ask you to keep spreading the truth, and remember, a small click on the subscribe button turns you into ambassadors of the truth and helps us share what's happening in this region with the world, so that everybody will know how to pray for the situation. And speaking of making a difference, I want to talk to you for just a moment about our partner for today's report, because for many Israelis, it's still about balancing reserve duty, work, and family. You come home, take off the uniform, and life doesn't slow down. I know that feeling. I've come back from reserves, trying to be present at home, catch up at work, and still feeling completely drained. So as this new year began, I made a New Year's resolution, not to do more, but to take better care of my health so that I can actually show up for the people who depend on me. And that's a decision that any of us can make going into the new year. That's why I'm using Vinya. It's an Israeli supplement made from red grape cells that helps support healthy blood flow to the heart, brain, and muscles. For me, that meant better focus, steadier energy, and fewer days of that foggy feeling that you feel like you're burnt out. I started using Vinya during my reserve duty, and I'm still taking it today. So if you're thinking about a New Year's resolution that you can actually keep, taking care of your health is a good place to start. You can learn more on TBNIsrael.com or call 800-638-1944. Again, that's TBNIsrael.com or call 800-638-1944. Thank you, and let's continue. We are switching our focus to the Gaza Strip, where this week in Rafah, 6 armed terrorists were identified approaching an area where IDF forces are operating. Within minutes, it was turned into an exchange of fire that left soldiers wounded and the terrorists eliminated. This incident demonstrates that the ceasefire is still alive, but it's very fragile, and every such violation immediately becomes a test of the next stage, which is supposed to include demilitarization and the question of who will really control the Gaza Strip the day after. This week, a meeting is taking place in Cairo, Egypt, between representatives of Hamas and the Palestinian Authority to establish the Technocratic Committee, a temporary administration that is supposed to hold the keys to the day-to-day engagement and management of what's happening in Gaza. Israel has conveyed to the parties a list of names of individuals who are not acceptable to be part of this technocratic administration due to prior involvement in Hamas governance in Gaza, but several candidates identified with the Palestinian Authority have been given a green light. Hamas says it is willing to hand over civil governance to this technocratic committee, but it is demanding to integrate its people into the mid-level ranks. For Israel's perspective, that is a red flag, because mid-level ranks are exactly where a terrorist organization knows how to stay alive without an official office, while retaining influence and weapons, which is the heart of the issue. However, the Americans are pushing forward, and the Trump administration is expected to announce Stage B very soon, including an official presentation of the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza with 15 members. Alongside the committee, an international peace council is planned, with 12 members giving high-level guidance for managing Gaza. Meanwhile, President Trump's envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, declared this week that the time has come for a transition from a ceasefire to demilitarization, technocratic government, and rehabilitation. He also emphasized a sharp threat towards Hamas that the United States expect full compliance with the commitments. Witkoff also mentioned Stage A, which included the return of the living hostages and the remains of 27 out of 28 hostages who were murdered in captivity, but that does not close the story because one is still missing. Ran Gaveli and his family has warned that moving to Stage B without Ran, in their view, is the loss of the main leverage. The Prime Minister's office said that Netanyahu spoke with Ran's parents recently and clarified that bringing him back is a top priority, and that even if there is a declarative move of establishing a technocratic committee, it will not affect the efforts to return Ran for burial in Israel. Ran's mother, Talik, gave a formulation this week that leaves little room for interpretation. Stage B, in her view, focuses on the demand to disarm Hamas and to demilitarize the Gaza Strip. There is no idea of withdrawal, rebuilding, or rehabilitation until disarmament. And in a related story, an investigation was recently published pointing to the penetration of Islamist messages to a Hebrew-speaking audience through organized editing on Hebrew Wikipedia. According to the claims, a center called Dar El Salam participated in editing workshops, created dozens of entries, and carried out hundreds of edits, and in the internal document described the activity as electronic dawah, Islamic preaching to a Hebrew audience. According to the investigation, the funding came from bodies defined as affiliates of the Hamas terrorist organization, and this is an important point when talking about a technocratic committee, because Hamas is not only an organization of rockets and tunnels, it is also an organization that knows how to exert influence and to stay in the picture even when it is not officially in power. From here also comes the American concerns regarding the international force that is supposed to be part of the picture. it has still not been announced who will send soldiers because countries fear being perceived as an occupying force and fear even more bringing foreign soldiers into the Gaza Strip while Hamas is still armed and can turn its weapons against them. If demilitarization is not real, there is no international force that will want to put boots on the ground in Gaza. Hamas, for its part, signals that it supports establishing the technocratic administration while creating the appropriate environment together with the Islamic Jihad. The Palestinian Authority also signals support. However, Hamas in the past refused to disarm without the establishment of a Palestinian state, and Israel still has not committed to a full withdrawal from Gaza. Within this tension, the ceasefire remains fragile. The bottom line is simple. Without real demilitarization and without effective control over the mechanisms of power, every committee is an aspiration, not reality. And here at TBN Israel, we will keep reporting, so keep spreading the truth. And now, let's move on to the northern arena. In an interview this week, senior Hezbollah official Muhammad Kamati declared that if the internationally recognized government of Lebanon continues trying to disarm the Shiite terrorist militia, it will lead to chaos and maybe to civil war. This shifts the conversation from Hezbollah's weapons that are being a threat against Israel to them being a threat against the internal stability in Lebanon. The line Hezbollah is drawing now is very clear. In its view, the ceasefire agreement with Israel applies only south of the Litani River. Any attempt by the state and national army to have all the weapons also north of the Litani River is presented as a crime and a foreign dictate. And at the same time, Hezbollah tries to project calm and says it will not be dragged into a confrontation with the Lebanese army. But the message in practice is a message of intimidation towards the government. On the ground, the Lebanese army already announced last week that it achieved operational control in the area between the Litani River and the Israeli border. The government is demanding from the army at the beginning of February a plan of rounding up weapons also in other areas. But Hezbollah sends counter conditions. First, the idea of withdrawals from 5 controlled positions in southern Lebanon. The almost daily airstrikes must stop, and Lebanese detainees are released, and only then maybe will a discussion be opened. Meanwhile, Hezbollah attacked Foreign Minister Yosef Raji after he said publicly that as long as the weapons are not collected, Israel will be able to continue to strike in Lebanon. In a newspaper identified with Hezbollah, they even called him an enemy spokesperson and asked how President Joseph Aoun and Prime Minister Nawaf Salam will deal with it. The operational meaning is very clear. Hezbollah is trying to cement an equation. Weapons remain, and the state will settle for crisis management. This also serves Iranian interests. Israel also sees an organization that refuses to disarm, defies its own government, and keeps the north on the edge. Therefore, the alert level remains high, and the message to Lebanon is simple. Don't let Hezbollah intimidate you, or Israel will take care of business for you. But this week, another issue is on the north, and it's more complicated, as the agreement that was supposed to be signed with the El Julani regime in Syria is collapsing over the regime's demand that the IDF withdraw from Mount Hermon. Israel has made it clear that this isn't going to happen, and so there is a stalemate. To explain, Hermon is the highest observation and controlled position in the sector. Whoever holds it sees early, warns early, and prevents surprises on the border. But in Jerusalem, they are worried about something else, a Syrian attempt in coordination with Moscow to return a Russian military presence to southern Syria, and Israel is also following contacts by Damascus with Russia and Turkey while on the ground. Finally, we had a 4.2 magnitude earthquake in the Dead Sea region this morning. So the ground was shaking in some places in the Middle East. So may God protect the people of Israel, the soldiers of the IDF wherever they are, and more than all, the people of Iran. Let's pray for the people of Iran to have a change of governance. Let's keep praying for peace in this region. Let's pray for wisdom to our leaders. Keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.